Tell us when. We're having some technical difficulties, I'm being told.
There's coffee.
Start this whole thing over from the start.
Okay.
I don't think they got anything.
Did they get visual?
They got visual. They've seen you guys talking.
Okay.
Well,
okay. Maybe we
I
should
guess
just go the rest silent.
they just need to get their lip reading team together.
Tell
And
them it was a test.
yeah, it's a test, total test.
Is the most capable of lip reading.
So we're going to break the news one more time to you. Once again, I'm Joe Marrocco, here from right up the street at Cafe Imports. Once again, joining you, and I know it looks like I'm the host right now, but actually, Derek, there have been some changes, and you're hosting this today.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so 11 years at Peace Coffee. It was great, like lots of growth, like man, so many blends, so much coffee, like thousands of pounds, going from, you know, gosh, I think there were like 500 or 600 pound days to 2,700 to 3,500 pound days. It was awesome, like great experiences, love traveling to Origin. But as time goes on, as a roaster, you want to grow and you want to give back to the craft, maybe more than you could, you know.
Right.
So now it's an opportunity I've gotten through Mill City. We worked together about 2.5 years ago, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yep.
like here doing a video, and it really kind of got my foot in the door here. And I've been talking to Steve over the years, and it's just a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity to work with Mill City to basically help do on-site trainings, off-site trainings, really share the knowledge of the craft of roasting, push roasting farther, get involved with roasting machines, get involved with more green coffee, do more videos like this with you. Like,
Yeah.
Just a great opportunity. I'm really excited. I really look forward to sharing a lot more of my coffee knowledge in the future.
I think it's fantastic, and you're going to be doing training here, and from what I understand, you're also going to be able to go out into the field and meet up with roasters in their roasting
exactly.
facilities.
Yep,
So
we'll be offsite. Yep.
if you need this guy, call him up.
Yep, any country that we can get visas to, we'll go to. So it's pretty open-ended. Yeah, super
Phenomenal.
exciting too. Yeah,
That's
Totally.
great. Wow. Yeah, or you can always come out here to the facility here where Derek will be teaching. I help out a little bit. I usually pop by. They try to keep the door shut, but I know the code now. So I'll probably pop by whenever you're having training, talk a little bit about green coffee. And also another new piece of news is Cafe Imports has really partnered with Mill City in a little bit further level to where when you come out for your introductory class, if you come the day before, in the afternoon, you can come over to Cafe Imports. We're going to teach you a cupping class. We're going to take you on a tour of our green coffee warehouse and talk about green coffee importing, green coffee contracting, all of that kind of stuff. It's just an afternoon of fun at Cafe Imports, basically, and that's all a free add-on to your class that you're taking here already. So please come out for these classes. I think that they're one of the most beneficial classes that you can take, especially all that's packed into a single day for the classes here. Furthermore, we have even more news to share with you. We're going to be, there's a class that's coming up. The class is on Thursday, October 19th here. It is an introductory class, and it does have the Cafe Imports add-on the day before. However, the cool thing is the next day on October 20th, we're going to have a giant event here at Mill City. We're calling it Minnerosta. You can jump onto, it's www.minnerosta.com, right, Nick? Okay, great. I got it right. I think it's .com. Minnerosta.com. And you can jump on there, see all of the events that we have planned right now. We're kind of working out some details on some other things. But my really good friend Rob Hoos is going to be here. And you may know Rob Hoos from the book that he wrote on modulating the flavor of coffee, really focusing on the Maillard reactions that take place in coffee roasting. He's going to be here. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of live feeds throughout that week. So if you can't make it, you can definitely tune into this channel, and we'll be on and we'll host these talks later. Some of it's going to be things that you will not be able to get at home, though. So you do want for those exclusive features that you won't be able to see. Basically, we're going to kick the day off with some coffee and donuts on that Friday the 20th. We're going to have a live stream interview with Rob and myself. We're then going to have some off-camera interviews with Rob. Then later that night, Rob is going to go through his modulating the flavor of coffee, modulating the flavor profile of coffee book and his whole research project around that and what things he has been researching since, and he's been doing a ton of stuff that really supports a lot of the information that book has in it. We're also going to have competitions. We're going to have, on Saturday, we're going to get hands-on coaching from Derek, myself, a few other people. Rob is going to be here for that. You can just kind of bounce around from one machine to another and spend time with different roasters on different machines. That alone is worth the trip, in my opinion. And then we're going to have the Focus on the Roast competition. So this is huge news. I know people email Mill City all the time about when the next Focus on the Roast competition is going to be. And that competition is going to be that Saturday afternoon. And it's going to be pretty cool. I'm not going to give too much information out about it right now. We're going to be putting that information online. But this year it's going to be a unique opportunity to have your coffee judged live by myself, by Rob. We're going to have some other fun things happening around that. And then that night we're going to have, for the people that are here, a competition that you can participate in that's going to be a taste competition, and you're going to walk away with a pretty cool prize if you win that competition. So all of this stuff is going to be posted on the website, and more information about that is yet to come. So that's a lot of house cleaning. I appreciate you all sitting through all of that, especially with the technical difficulties we've had. But we're going to jump on a roaster today. I know we have done the roaster school videos for quite some time without a roaster involved. It's been more theoretical, but today we're back on the roaster. What roaster are we roasting on today?
1 kilo, 1 kilo gas. Yep.
Sweet.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about the features of this real quick, and then we'll get into the coffee that we're going to roast.
Yeah, I mean, the Mill City roasters are really nice when it comes to like the craft of roasting. They have a lot of bells and whistles. So, you know, we have full-on like airflow control, which is definitely like important as you start to get into roasting. Drum speed control, solid steel plating all the way throughout, like dual fans, so you have a cooling fan, you have a roast air fan because you don't want those two to run up against each other. We have it's got the natural, once you add the fidget to it, it's naturally going to communicate with your data logging program. So like we use Artisan, but other data logging programs, it's already going to be on it. You can see they're starting to come in some really nice colors. You get lots of chrome steel. Like really, when I think about a roaster, there's not anything that I would want more, and there's really not too much lacking in these machines. They're pretty perfect.
Yeah, I mean, some people would consider 1 kilo size to be kind of a sample roaster size, but this is definitely built for some serious production to be done on that 1 kilo level. Don't tell anybody this, but I've actually roasted 2 kilos in a 1 kilo machine, and it actually handled 2 kilos pretty well just because I wanted to test it, but don't actually do that. What now?
Wow, that's impressive.
Oh, I did that too, but that didn't. Nick is telling me I also did a 4 kilo roast in a 1 kilo machine, but that didn't turn out so well, so I was going to leave that story out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
I think I did like some 200-gram sample roast in this, and I was getting pretty good results even.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean? 100%. Just dialing down the air and stuff like that. Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. So it's tons of like manipulability, like control. You have full control in these machines. So
that's right.
And that's what's important.
And one of the cool things I like too is the temperature controller here. You can set a certain threshold temperature that once it reaches that temperature, it'll shut off the gas. So as you are warming the machine up, you can put that on there as a safety feature. That doesn't mean walk away from it and leave it alone, but that does mean that right now I have it set at 445. Once it hits 445, it's just gonna turn the gas off for like 30 seconds. So pretty cool. All right, so today we're gonna roast a pretty beautiful coffee. This is a coffee that is generally one of my favorites of the year. There is a mill down in Costa Rica, which Cafe Imports has an office in Costa Rica. We'd love to have you down if you are ever in the vicinity during harvest period. But there's this mill called Las Lajas. Las Lajas is one of the foremost Central American producers of natural and honey processed coffees. As a matter of fact, they are given credit for having the first really high quality natural to come out of Costa Rica, which happened, it was a happy accident.
Yeah.
Well, it was a sad accident at first. There was a horrible earthquake that knocked out power to the area that Las Lajas is in, and they had a bunch of coffee that they needed to process, and they were unable to because the equipment wouldn't work. So they dried the coffee out as a full natural, which the story of coffee really is natural processing.
Right.
All coffee was processed as natural coffee for millennium. Ever since coffee came into, production existence, it's only, within the last 150 years or so?
Yeah, Western influence mostly.
That's right, that we've started doing wash process coffees, and that other processing has come out of that tradition of wash process. Now what we think of as like the coffee flavor of coffee, That's wash processed coffee. That's really new. Your more traditional flavor of coffee would have been a natural fruity flavor. So now we think of coffee as more of that roasted seed-like characteristic. Prior to that, it was that roasted fruit-like characteristic that naturals possess. So at Las Lajas, they threw the coffee out on the raised beds and on the patio to get the coffee drying, and nobody would buy the coffee. Why?
Really?
Well, because nobody had tasted a natural processed coffee for so long,
yeah.
in particular from Central America. And they associate natural processed coffee, or at least back then they did, with refuse. With the coffee that, yeah, they were gonna give away basically at pennies on the dollar as the leftover stuff that was overripe or that was underripe. So Las Lajas, even though this coffee was beautiful and dried perfectly, they had no place to sell it. And there was a little happy accident to where some college students happened to be going through the mill, learning about the mill. They took some of the coffee from the mill because Las Lajas was like, yeah, sure, have it. We're not going to sell it. And they did a cupping at a university in San Jose, and the owner of Cafe Imports, Andrew Miller, happened to be at the cupping, and he got to that table. Of course, Andrew has a global knowledge of coffee, so he's tasted naturals all over the world.
Right.
And so when he tasted that natural, he called up Las Lajas and said, I'll buy all of this, whatever price it takes. And so the rest is kind of history. So now they do natural processes, they do honey processes, they do a lot of different things. And so today we're going to roast one of their coffees. One of the things that, well, roasting naturals is a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think about roasting natural coffees?
Yeah, roasting naturals is a challenge. You know, when I first started to roast naturals, one of the things that I was taught was that they tend to take on heat differently than washed. You know what I mean? So they can scorch easy. They can burn quite easily. They also, towards the end of the roast, can start to gain energy and kind of get out of control, and it's harder to control the end of a roast. So that was my early knowledge. As I started to learn more about it, I started to learn that naturals have a different kind of roasting style. They're very much a coffee that you roast, you know what I mean? And so if you think about them as a coffee, not as something totally different, you can kind of wrap your head around them a little more, I think. And so what I learned was that it was basically like the coffee grid, I like to say, kind of got shifted down. I kind of had to adjust the roasting of those coffees completely. Not just try and manage one part of the roast to try and create a sipper cup, actually shift the whole profile off and just look at those coffees in a different light. Kind of look at the overall roast level as a lower, lighter roast level. Think about the drop temp, think about dropping them lighter, think about developing them the same as washed, just shifting the grid off a little bit so that my application of heat wouldn't cause any roast defects, but at the same time I wouldn't go too slow and cause any baking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to share with you all a theory. I may have mentioned this a little bit in one of the episodes in the past, but when you think about coffee, coffee is a seed, and we have to continually remind ourselves that it's actually a seed. And until we start to roast it, that seed is living. It's got all of the potential to grow a coffee plant, unless the seed has died somehow. But generally, it's living. And the seed is especially living when you pluck it from the tree and it's in a ripe fruit. And when you start drying that ripe fruit is sitting in the sun, it's getting warm, it's moist, it's this environment of warmth and darkness and moisture that is the perfect environment for a seed to start doing what a seed does, which is germination. Now, when we think about what we do when we roast, we're taking these large molecules, polysaccharides, we're breaking them down with heat energy into smaller molecules, we're breaking those down into smaller molecules yet. But the large molecule that we're beginning with is a stored energy molecule, and that stored energy is there for the purpose of growing a new plant. So the seed's first instinct when it's beginning the germination process is to begin taking those large potential energy molecules and breaking those down through a process called hydrolysis. So it is my theory that a natural processed coffee, especially a specialty grade natural that has been picked with a ripe cherry, dried in a ripe, really moist, saturated cherry, that they begin that germination process. So when you're roasting that, it makes sense that in order to get the same quality of development or the same amount of roast, shall we say, on a natural, you actually feel like you're roasting it less. You feel like you're roasting it lighter, but you're seeing that it's still the same color. You feel like you're roasting it in less time at lower temperatures, but really you're getting the same amount of roast effect on the coffee itself. I believe that's because the natural processing method gives that coffee's breakdown a bit of a head start. It's kind of got a jump on you. So it's going to be done a little early. Instead of, you know, cooking something, it's almost like you're warming it up or reheating that item. So we're talking a lot about it. Let's get some coffee in this machine and roast.
That makes a lot of sense what you just said. So 1 kilo?
Yeah, we got a full kilo there in the 1 kilo drum. And we've got this coffee roaster pretty warm here. I'm gonna turn off the gas here for a moment.
Okay, yeah, no fuel.
I'm gonna turn up the air a little bit, just so that we can not cool it off too quickly.
Right.
We're not opening this door, you know, we're letting some air kind of move through the system. Just drop that temperature nice and naturally. If we cool it off too quickly, we get what I call a false cool down, where the coffee machine still has a ton of energy packed into the metal, but the probe is just telling us something different than that. If I open up this door, of course, I expose that probe to a lot of air, and it'll give me a false reading.
Cool air.
That's right. So now we'll drop this. What temperature do you feel like we should drop this?
I don't know. I mean, like, I tend to we don't want to go too long of a roast, so I don't know, maybe like 375?
375, I like that a lot. So 375 on this machine is still packing quite a punch. 375 is a pretty high drop temp still, or I would say maybe in the middle range of drop temp. On a 1 kilo north, I generally look at 350 as being kind of more on the low end, unless I'm roasting, like you said, maybe 200 grams or something. But on the high end, I would look at maybe even 400, but 375 is kind of right smack dab in the middle.
Right.
Okay, so we're getting down there. So instead of me dropping in right now, or instead of me waiting until this is at 375 to turn on the gas, I'm gonna turn on the gas and flame a little bit early. You can hear that pop maybe from home. I'm gonna turn it down really low. So now we are right at 376, about to drop that in, and that gives us that little bit of pad so that I don't have to pop this flame on with coffee in the drum. So I think we're ready to rock.
Yep. Ready? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Coffee's in the drum. We're debuting our coffee roaster camera here today. So maybe show them a little bit of that green coffee as it looks. A lot of times natural or honey processed coffees will have a little bit of a...
Skin kind of like that?
Yeah.
Yep, a little bit of outside skin, it kind of slips in the bean, things like that. Get that to me.
And they have a little bit of an orange color.
Yeah, kind of like fall leaves sometimes I'll think of. Or
that's right.
Early summer leaves, or early fall.
That's right.
Yep.
The geeky term for that, I'm gonna turn my air way down again. Sorry about that, guys.
Yep.
The geeky term for that, we call that foxy. Whenever the coffee looks kind of orange, it's got that orange hue, we call that a foxy coffee. Now, for a natural or a honey coffee, seeing that foxy color is cool.
Yep.
If you see a wash coffee like that, though, a foxy coffee may not be what you want for a wash coffee. That means something probably went wrong in that fermentation tank.
And the skin kind of held on.
That's right.
Yep.
So now we've been at this for about a minute now. I'm gonna go ahead and crank up the gas. Or where do you think we should crank that gas to?
I don't know, 1?
Yep.
1.5?
I think 1 to 1.5 is great.
We'll go 1.25.
Perfect.
Or 1.2. Yeah.
Now for this drum, at 100% gas, which means I've got the gas as open as it's going to go, my pressure is gonna show about 2 bars, or 2 inches, I'm sorry. So right now we're a little bit above 50% of what the capacity for this is, so I would call that 50%. You could also just mark it as 1.25. It really is up to you and your system.
Yeah.
What's important to note here is even though it's going up to 2 inches, and maybe your roaster at home goes up to 6 inches, or maybe somebody has told you that a roaster should be able to go up to 7 inches or something like that, it's really not so much about the pressure that this reads out, but more about the effect of the flame from that pressure.
Right.
So if 2 inches on this is 100%, and at 100%, I can still burn coffee, you know, within 9 minutes if I have it at that full capacity. then I know that I'm all good. If your full capacity is 7 inches and you're still not able to get your roast up and moving, then there's probably something wrong with the system. So pressure can be built into a system through a few different ways. You can have the gas line that's very large and have very low pressure, but you still have a flood of gas. Or you can have a gas line that's very tight and small with very little gas going through it and have a ton of pressure. So don't think about pressure in terms of how many BTUs you have access to. Think about pressure in terms of how does it affect the system. That's a free little aside.
Nice.
Where are we at on this coffee?
It's starting to get a little bit of color. I think we're at around, let's say, last 30 seconds. We're pretty much like 16, so we're at 32 ramp right now.
Cool. And what he means by 32 ramp is that
starting to get a little bit of green, a little color change.
I'm gonna go ahead and adjust this down just a bit.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're getting through that. Yep. Starting to give a little chaff off, it looks like.
So what are we
going through the straw, maybe?
Yep. What are we wanting to achieve with this coffee?
I'd say like for overall cup, final
Yeah.
cup. I mean, I think this coffee is really, I actually sample roasted this coffee earlier in the week, and it's a really dynamic, like complex coffee. So I mean, it has really a nice acidity. So super nice, clean acidity, which is present, you know what I mean? The coffee is really well-bodied. It's a very well-bodied coffee. It's very sweet, and it has lots of nuance. So I'd say if we could capture all 4 of those in the final roast, we'd be golden, you know what I mean? Like balance of, probably might be a little more heavy-bodied than acid. You know, maybe there's a little more body than acid, so that balance might not be perfect. But good fruit nuance, you know, clean cup, sweetness. Yeah, I think that'd be really nice.
I think that sounds great. One of the things about a natural coffee is a natural coffee has that fruit tendency, and that fruit tendency can saturate a lot of the cup. And so it may be challenging at first to get through that fruit tendency to see where does the pure acidity, where does the pure sweetness, and where does the pure body lie. Because you can accidentally get fruit in a natural process coffee. So when you're roasting a natural process, think about those underlying tones and how you're using those tones to lift up that rich cherry-like flavor or that that really intense blueberry-like aroma that you're getting.
Right.
And remember that fruit-like flavors are not acidity. I hear a lot of people say that natural coffees are really acidic, but that's because you're tasting fruit. Fruit is an aroma that you're getting in your nose, whereas acidity is that tingle that you're getting on your tongue.
Yes, for sure.
How are we doing?
Good, we're doing really good. Yep, starting to get, we got a little bit of nuttiness going. I think our ramp is still going really strong. Yeah, I think I agree. My first natural roasts were very one-dimensional, very heavily body and sweetness, and the acidity was like muted or gone. And I think at the time I thought that they weren't, it wasn't present. That it was really the roasting that I was doing. I was going a little bit too long with it, baking a little bit, getting rid of that acidity, kind of creating an unbalanced cup. So it just takes a little bit of more thought around it. But you can get a balanced cup with a natural. You just got to understand that acid-sweetness balance.
That's right. Sounds good. Well, we're probably going to be approaching first crack here soon.
Yep.
I'm going to
bring up the air.
Ramp that air up quite a bit here. Okay. One of the things that I like to try to do is build momentum into the coffee early in the roast and then slow that momentum down, or allow that momentum to be what carries the coffee through the end of the roast, especially on a natural, because that natural has a lot of exposed sugar, or what I would call fruit-like products from the fruit having dried on the coffee seed, and also having had those large those large sugar molecules that are deep within the seed already starting that breakdown process. We can easily over roast this coffee. We can easily make the chaff taste like ashes. We can easily make the outside taste like burnt sugar or burnt fruit instead of good coffee fruit.
And then have a raw middle still too.
Exactly. So we want to kind of build some momentum at first, then let it kind of coast into its own ending. And we like to smell naturals a lot toward the end of the roast because we want to capture when it's done with the aroma, and not just rely on what we're used to with with wash process coffees, because this coffee is not going to roast to the same degree. Yeah, we're definitely in first crack. Yep. Here we're popping right at 7 minutes in, right at 400 degrees. So we've gained a lot of momentum. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this down even further. I know that there is a trend out there to turn the gas completely off at first crack. I don't really like that trend. I like to control fuel.
Yeah.
So if you have to turn the gas off at first crack, that means it's moving too quickly once you get to first crack.
Right. Yep. Popping really nice.
Yeah. How's it smelling?
Ooh, I just got a little bit of fruit right there. A little kind of cherry.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like maybe a little.
Give them a whiff.
Maybe a little gastrique for any of you French chefs out there. Yeah. Now we're getting more caramelized notes.
Yep. Cocoa.
Yep. Caramelized sugar. Oh yeah. Yep. I even got a little, maybe some tea rose right there.
Love it.
Yeah, it's hopping really well. Yeah, it's going great. Yep.
We are maybe about there.
Yeah, I think so.
I say drop it when you're ready. I'll get your cooling fan and your cooling stirrer on.
420 be the number. All right.
420 it is. So there it is. Now some of you may be thinking, well, I still hear that popping. Is that still first crack going on? Yes, actually it is. It's fully in first crack.
Yep.
We were about a minute and a half past first crack. Past first crack's beginning. Now, another thing I wanted to talk to you about is, okay, I'm gonna probably fail at my math on this a little bit, but if we look at this roast curve, can they see that pretty well at home? Okay, great. I get a lot of people say it's kind of glary. I apologize about that. It's the best we've got for now. So let's say first crack happened at 7 minutes, and then our drop happened at 8:30. So then this amount of time in between was 1 minute and 30 seconds. Now some people out there in the roasting community would give this a specific percentage, right? And they would say that this is such and such, which I'm struggling with the math right now. What percentage is that? Maybe figure that out.
130 of 830?
Yeah, 130 of 830. So some people would say that this percentage is now the percentage of quote unquote development that we need for this particular coffee. And I would argue that that is not the case. That's looking at this in a very different way than what we should maybe look at coffee roasting as. And here's why. If you think about the temperature change that coffee goes through while it's in the roasting process, you put the coffee into the drum, and that coffee at first takes off. It's, as Derek called it, that it's ramping up quickly. That coffee is moving through temperature very quickly. So right here, the first part of this graph is reflecting a very large amount of change that's taking place in the temperature of that coffee, right? As you get closer and closer to the end of the roast, the terminus, then at that point, the change in temperature is very low. We know that we slowed that temperature way down. So toward the end of the roast, you may be moving only 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees per 30 seconds. Whereas in the beginning of the roast, you may be moving 20, 30, maybe even 40 degrees per 30 seconds, depending on what kind of equipment you have and what you're trying to do with it. So that change in temperature, however, does not reflect the change in the coffee itself. We have a different triangle for that. So the change in the coffee itself is an inverse of this. So when you put the coffee into the drum right at the beginning, the coffee is moving through temperature very quickly, but it's not actually physically changing very much. As a matter of fact, it stays green for a long time. It stays very hard for a long time, and then it starts to give off some moisture. We call that the drying phase. That doesn't mean it dries completely out during that phase. That means that the only thing that's happening in the green coffee at that point is moisture loss. There's no other changes taking place. So in that drying phase, we still see green until we finally get to yellow. Yellow is actually where this should probably start, where this triangle should probably start. right at the point of yellow, because that's where we start to see physical changes.
Yep.
And that's where we're shifting from that endothermic stage to that exothermic stage, where we're switching from absorption of heat to creation of new products because of that heat. And actually it's creating energy in the coffee itself. So as it goes forward in that roast, it is changing much, much more. So the argument that I want to pose to you is that if you look at 1% here, and if you look at 1% here, this 1%, as it pertains to the existence of this coffee in the roasting process, is much more powerful in the amount of change that it's inflicting on the coffee than the rest of the percentages of that roasting. So, for instance, if I look at 5% here, the change in this 5% is most likely more than the 20% leading up to that point. I can't grade it out exactly, but that amount of change is significantly higher, and it's an almost exponential curve of change that takes place in the coffee. So all that to say, if I think about this, and I think about my first crack starting at 7 minutes, my end times beginning at 8 minutes, or ending at 8:30, this 1 minute and 30 second representing a certain percentage, and something happens here in the beginning of the roast to where my first crack starts instead at 6:50, and I still want to think about this in terms of percentage only, so then that would mean that my end time now needs to end at a different time than 8:30, no longer at 8:30, but not at 8:20 either. Instead, I would end closer to, what would it be, like 8:15? That 5 seconds is now no longer part of the roast curve. It's gone. And now I've roasted the coffee differently. Even though the adjustment was here, where there's not a lot of change or no change happening in the coffee, it's affecting the coffee in a major way at the end of the roast, because I'm not fully going to the same level of development that I went the last time. So it's important when you're roasting, and I would say it's especially important when you're going from a wash coffee to a natural process coffee, that you think about this as a block of time and not simply a percentage of overall roast, period. Yeah. This is even more important when you're talking about moving from one machine to another machine, right, or when those of you roasters out there that are sharing your profiles are sharing those profiles. Yeah. Don't listen to somebody say, well, it was 10% or 20%. Right. It's more complicated than just that. You're not going to be able to duplicate what somebody else does just simply by plugging in a percentage.
Yep. Yeah. At Peace, we had I call it the roaster cheat sheet, and it was basically a list of every coffee we roasted, and it had the exact post-crack development time for that coffee. Yeah. So no matter how the roast was going, you could still take it from post-crack and get that perfect development to get consistent cups.
That's exactly right.
And it was a time.
Yeah.
We had an understanding in the roastery of what the percentage was, but that was just a number we threw around. The time was what was key.
That's right. Yeah, so if you look at this curve, if you want to duplicate the flavor profile that you have in the curve that is your standard for that coffee, but you see deviance from that curve, if that deviance is here early in the roast, you're still good. Just get on curve. Right. The sooner you can get on the curve, the better your chances of duplicating that roast. Right. If you're off curve here, you're sunk. If you're off curve here, you're okay. Right. So if you're off curve here, there may be variance, but it's going to be less perceivable variance. But here is where it really matters. And so getting on curve, giving it the full breadth of time to give it the full breadth of development from first crack and on is very important. Now, that's not to say that there's not development happening here. You know how I feel about that. This is your pre-crack development, but it's not unfolding at the same pace and rate that it will later in the roast.
Right. No, I think that's a golden nugget. Like, I think what you just explained took me 3 to 5 years of production roasting to really believe. Like, it was kind of bumped around in my head for years, but then it was like, oh gosh, that's it. Like getting on track, and then the final, like controlling the roast to the end. And what you were talking about too is about consistency of cup. And I think sometimes roasters get wrapped up in consistency of profile. I have this perfect profile, and if I just nail my profile every time, my cup is the same. It's not true.
That's exactly right.
Even your green in-house changes if it's been there for a couple weeks, couple months. So now you got to adjust your profile. So consistency of cup is really what roasters need to focus on.
That's exactly right. Yep. And what took you 3 to 5 years took me 10 years to figure that out. So you're well ahead of me. And that's what we're here for. We're here to take all of this stuff and pack it into a nice, pretty box for you. So if this doesn't make sense, reach out to us, let us know. And if you have questions about this, one of the reasons that I brought this up is I think I've had 5 to 10 questions like this over the past week to week and a half. So your questions, even though I may not come to you specifically, I'll collate those and put them into kind of a pretty little package for you that hopefully explains a whole lot more than maybe just you yourself are asking. And I know this probably doesn't make sense just looking at it, so if you need me to draw that out a little bit better for you, I could probably do that as well. Well, cool. So now we have this roasted coffee all the way cooled down. That is beautiful.
It is. It's very nice. It's got a nice stretching. You know, it's not too wrinkly. Doesn't have, I don't see any kind of like scorching or tipping.
Nothing.
It's like in that nice kind of like, I don't know, medium kind of spot, you know, but being a natural, it's probably going to cup out a little lighter, I want to say.
So I'm going to show them the roast kind of there. Can they see that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful brown.
I see very flat surfaces, which is really great. I see the expansion overall on the coffee is really nice and even. That's what Derek is saying is by stretching, it's just expanded out. It's almost like swole in an even fashion. So there's not any bubbles on it or any puffing on it.
Right.
There's no tipping, no scorching, just a beautiful, pure roast.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Now we did not run a profile while we did that coffee, because this coffee being a coffee that we really, you know, the first time roasting in a production, we really wanted to be engaged in and get the sense of. We can't get the sense of that when we're just allowing a profile to kind of guide us. So I encourage you to just throw the coffee in the machine, get a sense of that coffee. Is it going to heat fast? Is it going to heat slow? And then start your profiling process after that. It's a really good way to get started.
And the coffee's beautiful too. A lot of times in naturals you'll see modeling, just because of you'll have a lack of uniformity when it comes to the moisture of a coffee. This coffee is beautifully sourced. It's really nicely processed. It's got minimal of anything of modeling.
Yeah, no Quakers at all.
No, yeah, that's also kind of crazy. You know, usually you kind of post-natural roasting, you're picking Quakers.
Yeah, the reason that you will find Quakers in a natural processed coffee is generally they'll pick ripe fruit, but in that fruit there may be 2 seeds, one of which is underdeveloped or malnourished. It may be the same size, the same shape, and it may be in the same cherry, but for whatever reason, that cherry stopped the flow of nutrients to that side of the cherry. So the other seed is eating it all, while this seed is kind of just hanging out and not getting any food. So whenever you go to process that, both seeds go into the batch because they process it all together. However, if you take the time to take the cherry off the tree and float it, that cherry that has that less dense seed will float. It'll be more buoyant, so then you can take it off. But that's a process that, you know, if you think about Ethiopia, for instance, where they're doing a lot of natural process because they don't have access to as much water. So in a place like Ethiopia, are they going to float it? So a lot of the places where naturals are processed, Yemen is a great example of this, they don't have the luxury of flotation. That's the whole reason they're doing a natural process. They can't do it washed. So in those places you may get Quakers. I encourage you, don't reject a coffee based on Quakers alone. If it's affecting the cup negatively, then sure, reject it. But if you see some Quakers in a beautiful natural coffee, it may be part of that coffee's characteristic.
Yeah, definitely that. Yeah, so when I first started roasting naturals, it was a little crazy where I would pick all the Quakers out. And it was like, I think it was my first natural Sadama that I actually cupped one that I picked all the Quakers out versus one that I hadn't. And the one that I hadn't scored higher. And that was when I started like being like, oh, so with naturals, it's not all black and white with Quakers.
That's right.
But it's just my roastingness to try and pull out those Quakers. But sometimes the Quakers have a lot of yummy flavor. So yeah, with the naturals, it's not black and white like washed.
Yep,
for sure.
Do we have any questions from the audience? All good?
A couple of roast-specific things on what you just did, but
okay.
Not on the topic, so we'll jump through, and this was great.
Great. Cool. Well, thank you all for tuning in yet again. We're going to come back to you live next month from the Mini Roasta event. We're going to be cranking on some live feeds. So you know, fire up your computer, get that thing warmed up and ready, because we're coming at you. We're coming at you hard and fast.
Sure. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.